I jinxed myself last time I recorded one of these, so fingers crossed this actually previews West Virginia's game, this one against Iowa State, and it actually kicks off when it's supposed to. At least that's the case as we stand right now. This is another edition of From the Other Side here, brought to you by Pittsburgh Sports Live, and of course, WV Sports Now. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and as I said, the West Virginia Mountaineers now 5-3 on the season, not coming off a game against Oklahoma, as that game has been rescheduled to December 12th, are going to face Iowa State, as Iowa State, the Cyclones, really right now the toast of the Big 12 for whatever you think of the conference. That's the case right now for Iowa State, coming into the game at 7-2. And for this conversation, I'm going to be joined by Jared Stansbury, the managing editor of CycloneFanatic.com. So first things first, Jared, I definitely appreciate the time, as I said, off the air to you. It's been a little crazy week for us here, as we're a Pittsburgh-based outlet that also covers the Steelers and many other teams. So I will tell you again, you can blame me if somehow something happens to this game prior to Saturday, because I did record a whole preview with an Oklahoma writer. We had that ready to go. I'm storing it for December 12th, as that obviously did not end up happening, so I kind of jinxed that game. So we'll see what happens, but as we currently stand, West Virginia and Iowa State are scheduled to square off on Saturday. So, Jared, first things first, Iowa State, maybe surprised to some, maybe not a surprise to say maybe you or others who are more in tune with the program, but Iowa State 7-2 on the year. They really are among the class of the Big 12 this season, especially with Oklahoma kind of taking a little bit of a weirder year with two early season losses. Texas still not kind of back, and Oklahoma State right now coming kind of back to earth as the season closes. But Iowa State started off the year with a loss, a random loss outside a conference that even the Mountaineers were able to get those victories, and they were one of the few conferences able to actually even have that game. But Iowa State loses that. They're now coming off a 4-game streak. So I guess I'll get us started by asking you, how is this Iowa State team different than where they were to open up the season? And how are they so much better now than where they were to open up the season? Because they go from that horrible loss to now a chance at a conference championship.
Yeah. First of all, I'll preface this. Sorry if my roommate's dog is barking in the background. That he's a big old German Shepherd, and he likes to talk. But
we're fans of dogs here on the outlet, but I think with the headphones we're fine.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. But yeah, I mean, I think the big thing, man, that's the biggest difference from that season opener. Iowa State had some guys that were out with contact tracing and stuff like that leading up to the game, and they played in the game, but they were not able to practice in the weeks leading up to it, which obviously that can make a pretty big impact. And I think that there were some guys that just didn't have their wind. They just weren't quite ready to be in that situation where you're thrown into the fire. Another thing I think that was pretty important in that football game was that you lose your best offensive lineman at the time, your left guard, Trevor Downing, who was an all Big 12 player a year ago. As a redshirt freshman. He got hurt in the first quarter. The Iowa State offense had been able to move the ball pretty well up to that point, but then you're put in a position where you got to put a kid who'd never played before, has actually played really well for them since then, but at that point had never played a snap for Iowa State before that moment. And so I think that's one of the things. Another thing, you give up 2 special teams touchdowns in that game that were game changers. So I just think there was a lot of just kind of randomness that was going into it that, we've seen all across college football with the randomness of 2020, where just all kinds of different things can happen, and so I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think another piece of it too, Louisiana's not a bad team. They've gone on to have a really good year down in the Sun Belt. I'm not 100% sure what their record is, but I think they've only lost one, maybe 2 games.
Yeah, they're 8-1.
They've been in or around
the year.
Yeah, and they've been in or around the top 25 the entire season. I think that they it's obviously you don't want to lose to a Sun Belt team, but if you're going to lose to a Sun Belt team, if it in 2020, if it's not Coastal Carolina, at least it's at least it's Louisiana. But no, I just think since then, you've seen Iowa State really get back to where you got all those guys back into the mix. They haven't really had, knock on wood, they haven't had many issues with COVID or anything like that, to where people are having to sit out with the contact tracing and that kind of stuff. They've stayed relatively healthy for the most part. They've got a group of offensive linemen now that has been pretty, has been pretty solid here since probably about week 5 or 6. They've had that same group. It might have even been longer than that, but yeah, I think that those are the biggest things. You've seen Breece Hall really get into a groove. You've seen Brock Purdy, I think, over the last 2.5 games really start to get closer to what we expected to see from him this season. And that Iowa State defense has just, early in the season, the statistics didn't look very good because of the fact that they kept giving up those special teams touchdowns, and they were giving up points off of turnovers and stuff like that. But now, as the year has gone on, I think you see them now where I want to say that they're second in the league in scoring offense and second in the league in scoring defense. And a lot of that has to do with just, where they've kind of settled into the season. They've played the way that I think everybody expected them to play, at least how we expected them to play. And you've seen a veteran team kind of come into its own.
Yeah, and I will say, to be fair to Iowa State, Louisiana Lafayette's only loss of the year is to Coastal Carolina, as you mentioned, who Coastal Carolina has now moved into the top 25 pretty securely. You can say what you want about their schedule, and they do have a Big 12 victory over Kansas. Again, you can say what you want about Kansas, but that's a top 25 team that is the loss for Louisiana Lafayette, who then beat Iowa State to open up the year. What I can say, though, that doesn't defend Iowa State in that game is, yes, they were losing some players because of COVID and they weren't 100%, but Brock Purdy played. And as you mentioned, he's got better throughout the season, but 16 for 35, a 45 completion percentage, 145 for yardage, 1 interception, sack, and a 74 quarterback rating. For college football, that's really, really bad. For the NFL, that's still bad. But that just wasn't a game that anyone probably could even remember or be accustomed to seeing of him now. Speak to others covering the Big 12 and talk about him being the toast of the conference and being the best quarterback in the conference when he was not at his best in that game, which could potentially have derailed Iowa State's season to having a chance at being more than just the Big 12 championship, with Oklahoma State having lost. And the Big 12, in all reality, is not going to be a part of the playoff, and we've known that for several weeks. If Iowa State would have had that win and Brock Purdy would have played like he's been recently in that game, they don't have that bad loss on their resume. Maybe that's a different conversation if we get some chaos. Again, here speaking with Jared Stansbury, the managing editor of CycloneFanatic.com. The Mountaineers will take on Iowa State this Saturday. Again, fingers crossed on that, because you mentioned you haven't had to deal with COVID as much in recent weeks. Again, the Mountaineers have, with that game against Oklahoma being postponed to December 12th. Now, going a little bit longer here on Brock Purdy, I mentioned so bad to open up the season. He's been one of the best quarterbacks since in college football, certainly in the conference. What do you think has been a part of his transition to just improve so greatly through a relatively short college football season with so much going on? Is it just that he finally figured it out? Is there maybe an emergence of players around him? Why has he been so much better as the season has progressed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the emergence of players around him is probably a big piece of it. Iowa State brought back the 3 tight ends in Charlie Kohler, Chase Allen, and Jalen Sainer, who are, is one of the better tight end units in the country. And I saw today a graphic where they're the most productive tight end unit in college football this season, which obviously there's, levels to that just because of how many games people have played and stuff like that. But it's one of those things where, you had to replace some guys at the receiver positions that were really important in the Michael Petway and Deshaunte Jones. You've seen Xavier Hutchinson kind of become a bigger piece there. You lost Tariq Milton, who was your only receiver returning from last season, really. You lost him in the second or third game of the year. So I think Brock was in a position where he had to get used to some newer guys in the receiving core. And then obviously, like I mentioned, the turnover on the offensive line, where you had, I think in their first 5 games, they had to start 3 different combinations on the offensive line. And, you saw those groups settle in. And then the other piece of it, man, as Breece Hall, has gotten to, really I wouldn't say that he's emerged, because I thought that he had a really good true freshman season as well, the second half of last year,
Okay.
but where defenses have started having to put a lot more emphasis on trying to stop him, and you'll see a lot where early on in games, I mean, I think that these last 2 weeks that Iowa State has played have been perfect examples. On the first couple of drives against Kansas State was putting basically 8 people in the box, where they'd have 4 defensive linemen, 4 linebackers. They'd have a safety that would be about 3 yards back of the linebackers. And then they're like, okay, we're going to dare you to go one-on-one with our cornerbacks at the receiver spot. Iowa State was able to, have some success through the air in that, with that way. And it forced Kansas State to spread things out a little bit. And then that's when you see Breece Hall get loose, and that's when he starts to get his yards. So I think that that's a big piece of it, is where defenses have really tried to focus on him a lot more than they did early in the season. Early in the year, it was like, we're not going to let Brock Purdy come out and throw the ball all around the yard. I think that makes sense. But I think at the end of the day, too, Iowa State's offense is much better now because of getting that running game going. And it's put Iowa State's offense into where it's a much more balanced attack. You don't have to rely on Brock Purdy to do everything for you like maybe you did 2 years ago or last season. And but you just, you know that at the end of the day, the run game travels in my mind. I think that that's the one thing that it's like, no matter who you're playing, if you can come out and you can run the football, you're going to put your offense in a position to be pretty successful. So I think that that's probably the biggest thing. Brock still struggled at times, even going back as short as, even that Oklahoma State game. He didn't play very well in the first half of the game against Baylor. But ever since then, man, he's been lights out. He has played very good football in the last 10 quarters for Iowa State.
And Iowa State, 52, 38, 45, and 23 against a really, really good defensive unit for Texas. So offensively, Iowa State has absolutely picked it up, and that has led to the 4-game winning streak for Iowa State, and that would be 5 with a victory over the Mountaineers that, unlike WVU, would close out Iowa State's season. West Virginia, again, with still that game against Oklahoma on December 12th. To handle. Jared Stansbury, the managing editor of CycloneFanatic.com, joining me here to preview Iowa State and the West Virginia Mountaineers for From the Other Side series on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, WV Sports Now. Now, it's clear for the Mountaineers, even with the emergence of Jared Dagey, and it has been an emergence for him. I mean, he was not the starter entering or beginning of last season, and then eventually emerged toward the end of that, but now really emerging this year, with the exception of the Texas Tech game, he's been good enough for the Mountaineers this year, to say the very least. But Lady Brown has been the driving force for the Mountaineers offense, and if he goes, they have a chance. If he does not, they usually do not. Would you say the Iowa State offense moves more off what Purdy does or what Breece Hall does? You're talking about the two of them together making the sound offense that has led the way to Iowa State winning these games and now having a chance at a conference championship. But you're going to have one be maybe more of a factor. Which one of those two is more important for the Iowa State offense? Because there have been games that Bryce Purdy, we mentioned, has been off. Iowa State has lost those 2 games. Those are their 2 losses. But yet you're talking about Hall playing so well has allowed this winning streak to occur. So which one of them would you say is more of the MVP of this offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if you're talking about an MVP of the offense, it probably is Breece Hall, because even in, I don't know, I understand like the Louisiana thing, and I know that it was, like I said, I'm not trying to explain it away.
we can't put
like
lipstick on a pig on it.
It's just like at the same time, it was 10 weeks ago, and
sure.
like college football teams change in that time. That's so
Absolutely.
like I said, I'm not trying to explain it away. By no means is it an acceptable loss. I don't think anybody here, and I'll tell you too, like they know full well, if they hadn't lost that game, what position they could potentially be in right now.
I think that's the thing that's the thing that I'd imagine sucks so much for the Iowa State fan base, because I even though it's similar for Oklahoma with those 2 early season losses, if they would have only lost one of those games, they might still have a chance because the college football playoff loves them so much. But Iowa State doesn't have the cachet of Oklahoma. They're not going to get that chance every year. This is a special year for Iowa State. and in all reality kind of was squandered in week 1. But I totally get it. It's a totally different season right now from where it was.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll be completely honest too. In Ames, Iowa, we generally don't go into football seasons thinking about the college football playoff.
I'm sure that's,
You know, like,
right.
And that, I mean, moving forward, you know, after the way that this year has gone, that hopefully will change. But when you look at what that's been the goal, is to try and win the Big 12. And I mean, even after that game, you know, all of the players came in and said, our goals are still out there in front of us. You know, it would have been in mid-September, it would have been a little bit crazy of me as a columnist to go and rip on Iowa State for losing to Louisiana for just ruining the chances to make the college football playoff. Like that.
Right.
That's
right.
Yeah. Like that's just not
it's a
how.
different beat for sure.
Right. And, but I think when you talk about like who makes the offense go, I still think that it's Breece Hall. I mean, I think the thing that when you have them both playing well that you see is where the offense is considerably more explosive. You have a lot more, you know, room to make some bigger plays, or not that Breece Hall isn't explosive on his own as a runner. I don't know about the statistic now, but I know as of last week, he led the country in 50-plus yard runs. But, you know, when you get that opportunity with Xavier Hutchinson to get going, you give Charlie Kohler. It's just where instead of it being like the 3 yards in a cloud of dust or 3 yards, and then all of a sudden Breece Hall is going to bust a 50-yarder, you know, it's just consistent. And that's what you saw like against Kansas State, where it's just on 5 of their first 6 drives, humming right along, going down and scoring the football, or, you know, putting the ball in the end zone. And when Iowa State's offense is functioning at a high level, both of them are playing well. You can look at that last drive against Texas on Saturday, where the first play, they had not run the ball well the entire game. First play of the drive, they hand it off to Breece Hall. He goes for 18. Second play, you throw it to Charlie Kohler for like 15 or 16. The third play, you throw it to Dylan Sainer for 18. You hand it to Breece Hall inside the 15, and he runs it to the 3, and then you take a timeout and then come right back and you hand it to Breece Hall and score a touchdown. Like, that's when Iowa State's offense is functioning at a really high level. It's not either one of them, you know, carrying the entire weight of, or any one particular person carrying it all. It's just like you're mixing it up, and you kind of can keep people off balance, which is where the tight ends really come into play, because you can run the, you know, 13 personnel or 12 personnel that Iowa State runs a lot. And I think that's the biggest thing. I would say, you know, if I was going to pick an MVP, it's probably Breece. Brock is the one that makes the offense go to that next level, to where it's like super, super dangerous. But even in that Oklahoma State game, Breece Hall ran the ball relatively well. He had 2 long runs in that game. They had some difficulty keeping it going consistently, but, you know, Oklahoma State said, we are going to come downhill at you all day. And we dare you to throw the ball over the top. Iowa State couldn't throw the ball over the top to save their lives. But at the end of the day, they still had an opportunity to win the football game. You know, they lost the game by 6 points, and they missed 2 field goals in the game. So it's one of those things where it's like you have a chance, you know, even though the offense didn't play very well, you still gave yourselves an opportunity to win the game. And that was a top 10 team at the time on the road. So it's one of those things where sometimes, you know, hindsight's 20/20, obviously, but it comes down to picking nits almost on some level, I guess.
And obviously, if either one of them are having an incredibly off day against a good team that's going to make anyone vulnerable, your quarterback and your running back, those are the 2 key positions for most offenses in college football. Certainly that's been the case for Iowa State this year, and that's been a big deal and a big reason why they managed to turn the season around and potentially win a Big 12 conference championship. Going even back to that Kansas State game, that was when the Iowa State offense was clicking on all cylinders to almost perfection. Purdy 236, 3 touchdowns, a quarterback rating of over 230, which doesn't even compute. That's almost a video game type of stat. Whereas Breece Hall picks up 135 on the ground, 2 touchdowns, and a 33-yarder. So both of them were clicking in that game. There's been times where one led the way, the other one had to lead the way another week. And they managed to put together 4 straight victories. Only those 2 losses, one of them a relatively good loss against the quality Oklahoma State team with a Heisman candidate coming into the season, and the other one not that great of a loss. But again, Louisiana Lafayette's only loss is to Coastal Carolina, who's a ranked team, so it could be much worse, I guess you could say, and certainly not the conversation right now, because Iowa State has managed to turn the season around into a season that's been chaos for everybody else. So for 2 losses right now in a major conference, it's absolutely not bad for a program like Iowa State. Jared Stansbury, the managing editor of CycloneFanatic.com here. Mike Asti previewing West Virginia's game with the 7-2, number 13th ranked team in the country, Iowa State Cyclones here, hopefully kicking off this Saturday. Again, fingers crossed that COVID doesn't force this game to be moved. I'm not sure how that could even work, although Iowa State's season, regular season-wise, would end with this game while the Mountaineers still have to take care of business against Oklahoma, for whatever that ends up being for WVU. Now, Jared, I do want to ask you this because this is going to be a key to this game. It's been a key to most games for the West Virginia Mountaineers, and it's definitely going to be the case for 2 studs on Iowa State offensively and how they can handle this. And that is the West Virginia defensive line with the Stills brothers in particular. That's NFL prospects coming at them, and that is arguably maybe Texas being the other one. But there's an argument to be said that even though it's a 4-game winning streak and the offense is clicking now for Iowa State, defensively, this is maybe the toughest test Iowa State's had to deal with. Certainly their offense against that defensive line push from the Stills brothers. So how do you see that matchup shaking out? Do you agree that that's the toughest test for these 2 offensive studs in what they're going to see defensively from the Mountaineers, who were the number 1 defense in the country as recent as a few weeks ago? The season hasn't been as great as Iowa State's overall for WVU, but defensively it has. And this absolutely, to me, looks like the top test for this Iowa State offense. Do you see it that way? And how do you think this game is going to go? Because those Still brothers have brought it every single week, no matter what's happened for the WVU team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, when you look at it, I think it's hard to sit here and not say that it's the toughest test that the Iowa State offense has faced this season. I think it's probably been the toughest test that a lot of teams in the Big 12 have faced this season, just when you look at it objectively. And, I talked about it a little bit before. Iowa State's got some young guys up there on that offensive front. It would not shock me at all to see West Virginia try and do some things to confuse those guys. A lot of teams have done that. That's what Oklahoma State was able to have a lot of success with doing. I think Oklahoma State, that's probably the best back 7 that I've seen outside of maybe Iowa State's. Those guys can really ball. Okay. And they put a lot of pressure on that Iowa State offensive front. And, this is a little bit different where it's the guys on the defensive line, but, it's going to be a big challenge for that Iowa State offensive line, the biggest one that they've probably faced so far this season. And, I think that if you were going to have to face a challenge like that, this is probably the best time for them to face it, considering, now you've got a bunch of games under your belt and you have some experience and things like that. But, I think that Iowa State will probably be in a position where they don't really try and throw the ball over the top too overly much. Brock Purdy doesn't stand back there for, and do a bunch of 5-step drops or anything like that and really put himself in. They don't put him in position where pass rushes usually can make too huge of an impact. But, it's going to be a difficult task for that offensive line to clear some space for Breece Hall. And I imagine that Iowa State will probably try and do some different kinds of things to get the ball to the edge, and try and get some of their playmakers out in space.
And it also will be if the Mountaineers offense, and Jared Stansbury has certainly been prone to making mistakes, which has killed WVU at times this year, certainly in that Texas Tech game, can handle Iowa State defensively. So it really is 2 teams that are similar in some ways. Iowa State a little bit more of a veteran team with more of an experienced and veteran quarterback. Maybe that'll be the difference if one guy can have more composure and make less mistakes than the other against 2 solid defensive units. The Stills brothers versus pretty much anybody's best offensive weapons has seemingly been the key to look for in most of these games for West Virginia entering the season. Now, Jared, what I do want to ask you here as we kind of close up shop, and this is an interesting season, obviously, and this is a conversation that does exist now and is getting more steam now, and I actually talked about this covering another team that we cover here throughout the network on their post-game show, having a little bit different of a season. But obviously the college football playoff is going to happen, and that playoff is going to happen without a member of the Big 12. Oklahoma is not going to be the ceremonial representative. Nobody else is going to be able to really budge in there because, again, Iowa State had that bad loss earlier. Oklahoma State's now lost. Texas has lost a couple times. The Mountaineers have squandered games. It's just not going to happen for the Big 12 this year. There still are major bowl games that would be historic wins that I'm sure Iowa State would brag about and would boast about, and the fans there in Ames, Iowa would be talking about for generations potentially if you could nab one of those trophies and win one of those bowl games. But there is a conversation and a thinking out there that maybe there doesn't need to be a bowl season because of this pandemic that is continuously raging on. I mean, I cover an NFL team. The game has been rescheduled 3 times, which forced us to have to change when this recording was going to occur. College football's having to reschedule games. College basketball is dealing with it right now. The NHL may never return even into next year, and the NBA is trying to return in a couple weeks, but certainly a major question mark on how they're going to get that done. You know, the bubbling has worked. College football and the NFL have not been bubbling. It's harder in football. College football is not going to really be able to go and do that. So it appears in all reality they're going to do the playoff. They're probably going to do those major bowl games. They might even do some of the other bowl games. Obviously, money's involved there. But for you, do you think non-playoff bowl games should be existing this year based on what we now know about the pandemic, off of just your opinion? And do you think bowl games outside of the playoff, but still historic championship-laden bowl games have a place, even though it's not in the college football playoff, because you're coming at it from Iowa State? Indiana in the Big Ten would be a similar team having a similar year where it might not even be it might be a while before Iowa State and Indiana can claim a New Year's Day, a former BCS type of historic Cotton Bowl, those bowl wins. It might be a while, but maybe this is a year that you just play the regular season, win the conference, and say that's it if you can't be a national champion. Maybe those bowl games make sense. The Cheez-It Bowl, for me, doesn't seem to make as much sense. But where do you stand on the viability of the other bowl games outside the playoff and if they should occur? Understanding the special season that Iowa State's having and that it may not come.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, it's been interesting to just during this entire thing how you see the different leagues handle things and the infrastructure that these leagues have to be able to handle, you know, keeping things under control. When you look at across the landscape of college football right now, is there a league that has done as good a job, again, knock on wood, a league that's done as good a job as the Big 12? I mean, that I've seen. I don't know that there has been. I mean, the number of cancellations has been so much smaller than what there is even in the Big Ten. And the Big Ten's has played half as many games.
Even the Pac-12, which was way ahead of things, once they decided to come back, clearly because everyone else is back, they've dealt with teams. There was a week 3 Pac-12 game where there was a team playing. Utah was 0-0. They hadn't played yet. Everyone else had 3 games in. So that's a fiasco. Right. The Big 12 has not had that fiasco yet.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like Utah today had a kid that was on the Butkus Award semifinalist list. Utah's played 2 games. It was one of those things where I was like, okay. Regardless, but it's just, so that's the thing I think that is difficult about the bowl conversation, because that's where you have to start and looking at it is it's like, okay, what, you know, if it's a game between the Big 12 and the Big 10, what rules are we going to use? The Big 10's COVID protocols are considerably more strict than what they are in the Big 12. The Pac-12 is in a similar situation where you've got to sit out 21 days after close contact and like all that kind of stuff. And and you know, I personally, in my mind, I think that the Big Ten has really screwed this entire deal up, and they've kind of made themselves look a little bit ridiculous because of the lack of wiggle room that they gave themselves. And that's where I think the Big 12 is really, you know, it's going to come out of this looking pretty smart. But it's just, that's where when you talk about these bowl games, that's what I don't know. You know, how does that work? Or do you know, are you going to play by one conference's rules? Are those conferences going to let you play by somebody else's rules? Like how is that going to all work out? That's going to be something that I think is going to be a big conversation here in the coming days. But I think at minimum, you know, I think that playing the New Year's Six, playing the playoff, I think that's important. One, because I think it's important for the kids. I think that's important for them to get that opportunity. They earned that chance. It's just like with this season, you know, these kids have worked really hard to get to these positions, and to be, have an opportunity to do these things. Then we need to do everything that we can to make them happen for them. And I think that that's one thing. As long as we can do them safely, obviously. And then, you know, after that, I don't know. I agree with you. I don't know that we need to play the Cheez-It Bowl. I don't know that we need to play.
I love that that's literally a name of a bowl.
Yeah,
mean,
it's actually the bowl game that Iowa State played in last year. It used to be the Camping World Bowl. Now it's the
right.
Cheez-It Bowl. But I wish it'd been the Cheez-It Bowl because I bet we probably would have got some cooler swag while we were down there in Orlando.
I just got some Cheez-Its at the grocery store before we were recording this, actually. I'm a big Cheez-It guy. I'm not trying to hate on Cheez-Its. It's one of my favorite snacks out there. But, yeah, the Cheez-It Bowl, these bowl games that are named after locations of cities, basically any bowl game that's happening before Christmas, I get money and ratings, and I get the TV networks would totally be screwed. I get all that. But, number one, if you can't have fans there and the trophy is not really that big of a deal, then is there really a need to play it? Because when you think about it, normally you play it to have the season end on a positive note for those kids, even if it's a 7-5 year and it's a meaningless game in our eyes. It's still a postseason, and they put a trophy up, and they'd rather do that than just end their season on the note that they ended it on in the regular season. I get all that. It's like a free vacation for many of those kids as well to kind of celebrate their college season, maybe even college career. But how fun is that going to be when you go down there to play the Cheez-It Bowl? You have no fans there. You can't go to the nightclub. You can't be swiping away on dating apps trying to meet anybody because you're going to be banned from playing in the game. You're going to be locked down. They might bubble those games in particular. And it's just going to take away the fun that anyone 18 to 22 is going to want to have down there in a game that you're not really looking to be a national champion. So let's have some fun and try to win whatever trophy this is. If all of that is gone, these aren't pros. I don't know if they even care to play themselves. And you might see a lot of stars. You might see a Lady Brown saying, why am I playing in the Cheez-It Bowl when I need to preserve myself? Why get more miles on my legs for a game that is meaningless during a global pandemic that I might also get sick while trying to do it? So, they probably are going to get it done, but those seem crazy. But you do think that the New Year's 6 games should happen, even if the national championship obviously is already a conversation for another day.
Yeah, I do. And I definitely understand completely where you're coming from. I just think that, one, again, you've mentioned it several times, there's a lot of money that's at stake in these kinds of things. And like that doesn't obviously should not be the driving factor in all of these decisions, but
it's there,
it's there. And two, I think that, so I can tell you, the Liberty Bowl is not a bowl that anybody's going to sit here and be like, is super hyped about. But I can tell you, man, what that meant for Iowa State's program in 2017 to go down to Memphis and win the Liberty Bowl, that was a big deal. After everything that this program had been going through in the years prior to that, and like trying to work your way just to even get back to a bowl game, to go down to Memphis and beat a Memphis team in Memphis like that was a good Memphis team with several guys who are playing in the NFL now. That was a big thing. And so, to get kids an opportunity to go and play in those kinds of games, again, I don't know that playing the Cheez-It Bowl, I don't know about playing the, New Orleans Bowl or the Bahamas Bowl or the Hawaii Bowl or all those kinds of things. I don't know that that's the right thing. But, man, I think that if nothing else, if we can get, kids an opportunity to play in the Fiesta Bowl, to play in the Alamo Bowl, or the Cotton Bowl, or the Rose, the Sugar, whatever it may be. Sugar's in the college football playoff this year, but I think that that's something that we should really try and do. And again, when you mentioned it before, for a program like Indiana, a program like Iowa State, if Iowa State could play in the Fiesta Bowl, man, and then win that game, that's a big deal. Like, that's a big thing for a program like Iowa State. That's a big thing for a program like Indiana. At the end of the day, too, that's a big thing for a lot of schools. And so I think that they're going to play them. It'll be interesting to see how all of those things shake out as my dog tries to get me to throw a tennis ball for her. But it'll be fun to follow here over the next several weeks.
Yeah, and I'm kind of rooting for chaos, not chaos COVID-wise, but chaos on the field, since basically the 4 for the college football playoff is kind of set, certainly with the ACC trying to force those 2 teams in that title game. It seems like it's basically done for those 4. Big 12 outside looking in. It is interesting to think, and I didn't think of this until you said it, that the Big 12 might be, they're not going to be a national champion on the field, but they might be the champion of COVID in terms of the major conferences at least, which is weird because the Big 12 is not far removed from having a conference champion situation where the number 5 and 6 both were out of the playoff because they couldn't figure out who really was the champion. So that's not far ago where the Big 12 really messed things up as a conference and kind of screwed some teams that aren't the Oklahomas of the world that maybe only have special seasons every now and then. This year, though, maybe they actually figured it out and they helped somebody out. So we will see. And these games are going to probably get played because the money is there for sure, unless things really get crazy with COVID. But, I think your point is the point, and that's going to be the argument that I'm sure if somehow it's only going to be the playoff, I am sure the Iowa State fan base, the Indiana fan base, those fan bases would take their torches to social media and go absolutely buck wild because you don't know when these seasons are going to occur. And I think one example occurred in college basketball. Dayton had a legit shot to win a national championship, and that might not definitely occur in the future for that program. And they didn't even get any postseason at all. So not even a conference tournament to be able to show anything off. It was just a regular season of success. That's not good enough for college kids. So I think for those special programs, like if Ohio State somehow loses and flounders off, or even Florida, who maybe doesn't have an inside track, they on the outside looking in right now, if they end up in a New Year's Six bowl game, that's good for still them. But if they don't, or certainly if they end up in a Cheez-It Bowl equivalent somehow, they're not going to care about those games as much. But Iowa State does not have a guarantee that that's going to happen again. So certainly needs to take that opportunity when it's there. So hopefully it at least happens and they can be taken care of in that way to at least have those games that matter at the very least. Just lastly, Jared here, and again, I appreciate the time, man. I'll get you to your dog here in a second. If Iowa State wins this game, what do you think occurred? And if West Virginia pulls off, which will be an upset if they beat the number 13th ranked team in the country, but Neil Brown's still looking for that staple victory. He beat the number 16 team in the country earlier in this season. This Mountaineer team, with the exception of a couple Saturdays, can beat anybody. So if West Virginia would get this win, what do you think occurred?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's pretty simple. I think that when you look at what the line is, and how that has opened up, and how the season has kind of played out, I think if Iowa State comes out and plays their game and they don't shoot themselves in the foot a whole bunch of times, then they should probably put themselves in a pretty good position to be able to win the football game. If you come out and turn the ball over 5 times, probably not going to win. And it's one of those things where if you can come out and I don't know the best way to put it. Like I said, you don't constantly shoot yourself in the foot. A couple weeks ago against Baylor, they turned the ball over 3 times in the first half. Brock Purdy threw 3 interceptions in the first half of the game. They went into halftime down 21-0. And then Iowa State came out and scored 28 unanswered to take the lead. Or not 28, I can't remember. 21 unanswered to take the lead. So it was a situation where, in the first half, they played horrible. Luckily, you're playing against Baylor, who's not a very good team this year, and you're able to recover from it. But I think that West Virginia is a team, especially defensively, where if you get yourself into a deep hole like that, then you're probably not going to be able to bounce back out of it. So I think that, if West Virginia comes in and wins the game, then it'll be where they were able to create some havoc. They were able to force some turnovers and get that Iowa State offense really derailed and keep Breece Hall from getting loose in the running game and keep limiting the big plays and things like that. And then on the other side, you're just able to take advantage of mistakes and get things done when you have an opportunity to do so. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. Like I said, I think Iowa State, in my mind, I think Iowa State will probably win the game. I don't know. I wouldn't touch it if I was a bettor, to be completely honest, just because of all of the different stuff going on in the background with where Iowa State's at, and hoping that they're not distracted or things like that, looking at a potential Big 12 championship berth. But I think that this is a game that if Iowa State comes out, plays their game, and does things the way that they're capable of, then they should win the football game.
And it's a big game for Iowa State. It's a big game for the Mountaineers to still have a chance and to get in a better bowl game they otherwise would get into, and also have a season that's at least bowl eligible for the overall wins mark, even though that's not a big thing this year with COVID. You want to get to that point in year 2 on Neil Brown to show this progress and get a staple victory. So it's big for WVU, but it's even bigger for Iowa State, because if you would lose this game, which is still an unranked WVU team, even though maybe some could argue they should be ranked at this point, then that gets you away from New Year's Six conversation into a more Cheez-It Bowl situation. The bowl tie-ins are not that fantastic for the Big 12 outside of those New Year's 6. So nothing is guaranteed for Iowa State if the Mountaineers would prevail. And it also would be that bad taste in their mouth, as that would close off what has been still a special year for the Cyclones, with WVU still having that game against Oklahoma, try to fix things. And West Virginia having hope that it's not back-to-back losses to end the season against two teams struggling early in the year and playing really well now. So certainly vulnerable games for the Mountaineers. Jared, I absolutely appreciate the time. I don't want to hold off your dog any longer. I'll let you give him some treats. I think he was a good boy on the broadcast there. I'll definitely give him the stamp of approval there and the 10 out of 10 for dogs. So I think your dog was the MVP of this show. But Jared Stansbury, the managing editor of CycloneFanatic.com, I absolutely appreciate the time, man. The Mountaineers and the Iowa State Cyclones this Saturday. Iowa State 13 in the country, 7-2, WVU 5-3, looking to maybe squeeze in to a ranking at some point this year. So we will see, and once again, our fingers are crossed, this game actually can kick off when it is currently scheduled. For all of us at the Now family of network, WV Sports Now, of course, Pittsburgh Sports Live, I was your host, Mike Asti, and again, crossing my fingers to actually have football when it is supposed to occur.